Hello, hi and welcome. We're on. It's Friday and all the technology seems to be thinking, well, it's soon the weekend, so let's not help him anyway. So I'm having a little difficulties getting everything up and running. It seems to be working fine now. However, the projector seems to give us some sort of ugly artifacts from time to time, but I don't know what to do, and there was no IT technician over here right now. I'll go and see if I can find him during the break. Otherwise, just, well, when the screen flickers, you can do like this, and you'll see everything okay. I have updated the slides slightly, but I haven't uploaded them to Moodle yet. I will do that after the lecture. And by now you have probably seen that the groups are up, and I hope that the first person in each group has contacted all the others. If there's still someone who should be in this course but hasn't been appointed a group, please contact me. Otherwise we will go like this. I will shortly also post a request to you to pick a time slot where you will in the coming weeks have the weekly meeting, but more information will come on Moodle about that. Because now we still have a few slides left and we need to get through with Angular and see where we end up with everything. So last time we ended with something like this, namely that we have our Angular components. We have one component that we have a binding to, so we could get this name, Cesatine, from a variable available in the component, and we got from from a method that was available in our component as well. So we have binding communication with the different parts. So let's step this up a bit, and the first thing we would like to do is to make this more object-oriented. So that means that we would like to have our Jedi, or our name, the stuff that we want to show, as a object of a certain class. So what we do is that we create, preferably in a separate folder called models or something like that, a class called, in this case, Jedi Master, and we try to utilize all the benefits of TypeScript. So we create it with the different fields defined in the constructor like this. So right now we have two fields, namely name and home planet, and we also create getters and setters for this object. And we'd like to utilize this class and create an object in our component. So in our component we create an object called teen, and in the constructor we create the contents. So we create a new Jedi Master, we give it a name and a home planet. And see that we need to precede all of these with this, as we need in Angular. And we put this in the constructor and not in ng on init. Shortly talk a little bit more about that. And in the HTML, we need to call the object instead. And the object was called teen, so teen.name and teen.homeplanet like this means that we get the different facts from the object instead of hard coding it the way we did before. It will get even better later on. So in the constructor or in ng on init, well, we utilize the constructor a lot when we have services, because the constructor is run before ng on init. However, ng on init is part of the Angular life cycle, So things that has to do with Angular itself, when we want to set it up, when we want to bind to different objects or stuff like that, we can do that in ng-on-init as well. You will see how I do it and how it's done in many of the examples, and well, constructors for initializing services and dependency injection, and ng-on-init for very much of the other stuff. So let's move on to what's called directives. And directives are things to augment HTML, so the view itself, making additions to the view. And in our case, this would probably mostly mean that we can add things like selection and iteration. And that's a good thing, because we want to do things based on things that we can ask for. There are 3 types of directives, and we can create our own if we like, of either component, attribute, or structural kind. And we will mostly look at the structural ones, which will give us these iterations and selections, for example. But there are many more, and each component is actually seen as a directive in itself. So for structure, we can, just as I said, use iteration with ng-for or ng-if for evaluating expressions, making a selection. That could also be done with ng-switch, if we like. Apart from that, they are very similar to what we've seen in other programming languages, so they're not rocket science. But there are a few things that we need to know in order to use them. And for instance, just this thing that they are actually put as attributes in the HTML makes it a little bit more strange than usually. Also notice that they are prefixed with a little asterisk as well. This is best seen with an example. So in this case, we modify our component by, instead of just creating one Jedi, we create an array of Jedi, like this. And in onInit here, so we change from the constructor to onInit, we create a number of new objects. So we put in Sesatin, everyone, and Shakti like this. So they're entered into this array. And to be able to see all of these Jedi on the web page, we change the HTML template to something like this. And the important thing here is that we want to create an unordered list. In this case, we won't like to create an unordered list. We can do whatever we like, but we want to integrate this iteration into the HTML. And in our case, we will use an unordered list. And for each list item, we use this ng-for directive, and we tell it, well, basically for each j of Jedi, so let j be the first, the second, the third, and so on Jedi in that collection, that array. And then we just print out j.name and j.homeplanet like this. So nothing really strange, and it will look like something like this. And it will iterate over the array and print out the information, just as we saw. Great. We can also make selections, and basic selections is done using ng-if, and it's again just an an attribute for the element, and therefore we need to, for example, use it with a span, as we've done here. It works with any kind of element, of course. So what this one says, that this span tag should only be visible if this calculates or is computed to true. So if j.died is less than 0, so we need to have a a field in our class now that's called died. I will add things to the Jedi as we go along. And if died is less than 0, we should print out that this is a prequel character. And there's no else, so it's just this or nothing for this specific one. And as we see, we have added a death year to the Jedi Master. But we can have several of these. So if it died before the year 0, then it's a prequel character. If it died after the year 0, and the year 0 is the year of Battle of Yavin. So it will show original character if they died after that battle. So when we look at it, we'll see that it will go through the different, Jedi Masters, and it will print out a prequel or original character depending on when they died. And we see that it's in boldface because we added the little B tag as well. Great. As I said, there's no real else as such, but it's possible to make an else. But what the else does is to jump to another little piece of template code, HTML template code. So it points to something else to do if the expression does not evaluate true. And we call this an ng template, or if you look at tutorials from before Angular 5, it's called just template. And we give this template a name, and that is what we point to. And it's easiest to see like this. And what we do in order for this to work is to comment out the creation of the list. So the list will be empty, because what we do is that for the unordered list itself, we check if Jedi.length, so the number of Jedi are more than 0, then this will be done. Else, go to no Jedi template, which is down here. So ng temple, no Jedi. And if we comment out our creation of the array, we will see that no Jedi were found. If we go back, I can just point out that it is possible also to check for null or 0 by adding a little question mark as well. As usual with Boolean expressions, as we've seen in Java, for example, we can use the and or signs in order to add, for example, a interval, a range. So if died is larger or equal to 0, and at the same time died is less than 4, then it's an original character. But if we died after the year 4, it will be a sequel character. So the only thing we've added over here is this and. And in this case, we have Luke Skywalker dying quite late, and therefore we see him as a sequel character instead of a original character. But we'll change that later on. But that's just what we're going to do, what we do with these Boolean expressions. And as you saw, they work more or less exactly the same as they do in other programming languages. We'll be looking briefly at more bindings, because we can bind to a lot of more things. So we are going to add an image. We are going to look at different ways to bind to this image using string interpolation, pre-created attribute called bind source, or source in brackets. And basically this is just to show that there are different ways to bind to whatever we've got in the component. So the 3 lines over here just add an image, and I've commented out the 2 first of them, but you use one of them, and it really doesn't matter which one you use. There are different ways of doing the same thing. The first one is with string interpolation. If we've downloaded and placed a number of images in, for example, an assets folder, it should potentially find them, and then we just add the image. We have an image attribute again added to the class, and we look which image is it we're going to use, and we use the normal HTML source and just bind with string interpolation. Or we can use bind source, or we could use source in brackets like this. 3 ways of doing exactly the same thing, with their own pros and cons, of course, being possible to bind to methods and stuff like that. Yep, and that's me on perhaps a Monday morning and not a Friday morning, but hey. Or it might be what I look like when I go out on the Friday evening, who knows. Well, you will know if you see something like this, it's probably me. We can also bind to CSS classes, and I won't go through this because it's kind of boring, but it works exactly the same. We have something called class dot something or ng class. We'll look more into these with better examples when we get to validation, or rather error messages later on. So it's possible for us to get directly to a CSS class or to bind to a field that contains a number of different CSS classes that we would like to use. And if we want to do that, we need a method to return that. So if we create classes, prequel and original, with green and purple colors, that's the only thing we do with it. And then we update the logic with a CSS class variable like this, and then set CSS class like this, and call it from ng_init. We can bind to, so we can say that this prequel, if it is a prequel character, we want to bind to the class .prequel like this, then we go just to one class and we pick up whatever's there. Or we could use ng class like this, and then we point to a variable that uses a method in order to get a number of attributes. In this case, we use just one and put it to green, I think. Let's see. No, purple. So when we run this, if it finds a prequel character, it will call this, and if it's original, it will call the other one using the other way. Mainly showing this because you will see it from time to time when you study this, and also, as I said, when we get to validation. Style binding working exactly the same. Something that might be more interesting is the concept of pipes, which they are also really they really like in Angular, namely the possibility to use this as an operator in expressions like string interpolation to modify the result in one way or another. So we know that with string interpolation we can, for example, call a value in the component, and then we can use a pipe sign and one or more pipe commands. And we can even send parameters to pipe commands. And what does that mean? Well, there are a number of different pipes available in Angular, and it's of course possible to create your own pipes as well if you like. But what they do is things like upper or lower case the expression if it's text, for example, as we'll see, but it also works for creating currency or slicing out a piece of the information. So think about string manipulation with substring and stuff like that. Formatting dates in different ways depending on, for example, where you are. But the most I'd say most useful ways of dealing with pipes is to use JSON, the JSON pipe, to get the result as a JSON object or JSON string. That makes it easier to to move it between different parts in the application. And also later on, when we get to the connected applications, when we get to working with Firebase, for example, you from time to time see this async pipe, which makes it possible for us to basically know that eventually we will get an answer, but keep going until we get there. So instead of freezing up or just, if we don't use this, it will try, not get anything, and we won't display anything. But these services can take a little bit of time. They work asynchronously, and therefore, if we use the pipe async, we know that eventually we will get an answer, and we'll get the data, and it will do something when we get it. So, just as an example for now, I've added this pipe uppercase to the name, and that's basically it. So when we run it, we will scream out the name Cecitine like this. And that's the easiest thing to do. I could have shown currency or date, but as it is, neither currency nor date is compatible with Star Wars. We hope that this will come in a future update, but I haven't seen it yet. Let's move on then, because now we've seen the foundations, and the most important thing were these directives, making it possible for us to make iterations and selections. But we will also like to respond to things happening. And at the end of this part, we will have the possibility to create forms and send stuff backwards and forwards and so on. So we clean up the code a little bit. We add a field called time period. So instead of calculating whenever this poor sod died, we have it hard-coded in the class, or for this specific object of course, but the field is added in the class. And ngIf just checks for the time period. Colorization has been removed because it's ugly. The pipes, or the pipe, has been removed because no one should scream. And we don't show the image because it's way too big. So a little bit fewer things to show, but it makes it easy to read the code and understand how it works. And events, just as in any web programming, is just to react to and interact with the user. So we build on the HTML events, and we make it possible to react to all the things that are available in HTML, like for example on click, on focus, and so on. However, instead of using those specific in Angular, we have in parentheses the name without the prefix on. And that's because we do it a little bit differently in Angular. But in this case, we create a button which has a value, so it says something on the button. You don't have to use input type button. You can use the element button if you like. It doesn't matter. But what we've done here is to say that when you click this button, call add Jedi. And it will do this without any real postback, which is different from how it works with the HTML on click. And this parenthesis indicates that it's one-way data binding. As you see, all the normal ones, even the mouse things we can look for and react to. So we would like to implement this method add Jedi. We do that in our home component, or our only component. Add Jedi takes a Jedi Master as an in parameter. It doesn't return anything, it just pushes it to the list or the array. So we have an array just as before, and we just push this Jedi. Okay, in order for this to work, we need to send in a Jedi, and as we are working with objects, this will be actually JSON objects, and therefore we can, as a quick and dirty method, do it like this. So on click, add Jedi, and then in curly brackets, name, colon, Plo Koon, comma, home planet, colon, Dorin, time period, prequel, died -19, like that. And that just pushes everything to the add Jedi, and as this can be interpreted as an object, it will be pushed to the array. So when we run this, in this case, the only thing that happens is that when we push add Jedi, it will pop up like this, with no screen redraw or anything. So it's really instant, it just pops up there, nice and easy. However, we'd like to do more. Yeah, sure. Event information. It's possible for us to send information, like for example the event itself, so that we can pick out, for example, in this case, X and Y coordinates of the mouse if we like, but also possible to send the current object. So for whatever step we are, we can also send the object that this happens to. And in this example, we up the ante a little bit, and we will have a button for each of the Jedi Masters in the list. And when we press the button, it will show the time period. So if it's a prequel, original, or a sequel character. But it will not show it automatically. In order to do that, we also have this show time added to the class. So show time is a Boolean that just tells the application, should we show the time period or not. The method that we're going to call is this one, show time, which takes a Jedi Master and it just changes the show time. So it will be false to begin with, but if we call it, it will change to true, like this. And how do we add this? Well, we have our list of Jedi over here, our NG4, and it will go through each Jedi, and it will say, after this home planet, we will have a span for the show time that will show the time period if this show time is true. So if the field in the object is true, it will show the time period. But in order to change that, we need to create a button which calls this show time on click. And the amazing thing is that as we are using the Angular stuff, it's not making a post back as a button normally would do with an on click, but it is rather calling internally and just changing the page without a post back or screen redraw, which is kind of cool. So when we start up the application now, it will add a button to all of the Jedi Masters. And if we go back, we can see that when we make a call, when we press the button, it will call show time with the specific object. And that means that if we press toggle over here, it will reveal prequel. If we press toggle here, it will reveal sequel, original, sequel, and so on. Fast, easy, without any specific drawbacks really. And this is because we are always working on this one page. It's a single page application. And Angular also excels at utilizing and working with forms. So we will have a beginning form handling. I will show you one way, or rather I will show you several ways of handling forms, and there are plenty more ways of handling forms as well. And what we will do is to create a form in which we can add a new Jedi. So we need to add name, home planet, and also which time period. We will skip the death date, and we will automatically put the show time to false. And we will create a form, normal HTML form, and in this first instance we will call the usual JavaScript on submit, but we will prepend it with an ePrevent default because we don't want to post back. We want to work with it right away and prevent this post back. And then we will add to this example in order to make it more Angular and show two different ways at least of doing it. In this first example, we'll just print something to the console. And that's just to show. On submit, like this, and we are actually already using a little bit of Angular code because we want to submit this form or this event using the Angular submit and not the ordinary on submit. But we still add an ePrevent default over here because otherwise when we get here it will make a post back. But other than that, this is standard HTML. So we create a label, we have an input over here, and notice that we have a name for each of the different parts, all the different inputs, and this needs to be the same as the corresponding field in our object. So name, home planet, and down here we have time period somewhere. Well, not yet because I haven't implemented it yet. Because we just print out hello there when we push it right now. So that's not the fun way of doing it. We will introduce something called the ng model, which is one way of creating a better connection, Angular connection between these two parts. So it's a two-way binding in Angular that works by us having an empty object. We could possibly have several different, all the different fields as variables, so name, home planet, time period as just strings. But it's way nicer to create an empty Jedi Master object and bind to that. In order for this to work, we need also to add something called the forms module in our app module TS. So now we are beginning to have the need to work with the modules file as well. And in this case, we just add forms module, and we also need to add it to the list of things that we are working with. But after that, we just add ng model new object field to each of the different fields. So for example, if we want to, we have a variable called new Jedi, which is our backing beam, so to say. And we use this ng model to bind to the name. This notation is for two-way binding. So we have one way using is for events binding from the HTML to the component, or the harder parentheses the other way around. And this this looks kind of nice, parentheses and hard parentheses like this. And it's called banana in a box. So if anyone says, well, use banana in a box notation, this is it. And that's kind of the level of comedy we have in Angular. Yeah. Put this before the name, and this means that we have a connection between the two. So other than that, not much of a difference. ng model added to each of these, time period as well, pointing to the correct field of that specific object. And when this is done, we can actually use the add Jedi method with a push. I'm pushing the new Jedi. In this case, we've also we've set the disabled attribute for the click button to the result of the name of the planet not being entered. So this send it away button that we have down here is disabled until we've entered values. So when we push in Plo Koon, Dorin, prequel, then it lights up, push the button, and as you can see, it pops up immediately. Or you can't see that it pops up immediately, but it does. So it pops up there, and we can look at it and work with it without any screen redraws or postbacks or anything. But we can do it one step further. The way we saw it is quite okay. It's quite enough. It's no problem. But we can also use template-driven forms, which means that we see the entire form as a variable. We give it a name, pointing to something called an ng form. So we give it the name, Jedi form. And on the submit, we submit the entire form like this. But we still need the dummy variable. And we also need to point an ng name to an ng model like this. It gives a bit more safety, and it also helps us now that we would like to add validation. So all the fields that we have, we need to validate, and previously, a few years ago, we had to do that with JavaScript and so on. But today we have a number of built-in things that we can use in order to set that things are not validated in HTML. So for example, we can set required and min length to the input itself, and then we just in Angular read this and say that, well, if there is an error, then display this ng class. So this ng class will just print it out red. I will show you later on. But we have a number of things that we need to look for. And an error occurs if we have errors, namely that it's required and we haven't put anything there, and the minimum length is not what we think it should be. So if we need to have 3, then if just 2 characters, for example. And we look for this by checking also for touched. And this seems a little naughty. So we check this element, has it been touched? And touch means that have we been there in that text field, for example, and we've left the text field, then we have an error, because then we've been there. We should have put something there. But we don't want that before, because we don't want to get to a form and show a form page and have the errors shown there before we have touched them. So, and to make this even more naughty, we also need to check for dirty. So dirty and touched. If it's been dirty and touched, and dirty is when we've made changes to an input, for example, then it becomes dirty. And if we've been there and not done anything, we've touched it. And I don't know what the HTML people were on, but this seems to be kind of naughty to me. We don't want you touched or dirty. And we also check for the has arrow required, for example. And this is actually easier to see as a complete example. So for each of the different things, in this case name, we do all these things. We say that the input type here should be text. We say that it should point to the new Jedi name with the ng model. And this is the name attribute. And we point it to the ng model again. We set it as required, so the name is required. The minimum length should be 3. And if there are any errors, the ng class error should be shown, or used rather. That means that something will be read in this case. And that depends upon arrows or touched. Okay? Then we need to have somewhere where we put the text, and we do that in this span tag. And we use span because it's just one piece of text, and we have this if that checks for dirty and touched, and also if it has the error required, then we use this error text. A Jedi needs a name. But it could also be that the minimum length error occurs, and then this will become true. And all of this, it might look like a lot, but it's really not. It's fairly fast forward working with this. And we do that for all 3 of the different fields, or just 2 of them because we have a checkbox, drop-down list too. And what we can do down here with the button is that we check for the form being valid, because what we've done over here is, as we introduce minimum length and required, for example, HTML will set this entire form to either valid or invalid. And we only show the button if the form is valid in this case. So it will look something like this. Jedi needs a name, the planet must have at least 3 characters, and when we get everything run right, we can push the button. On the receiving side, in the component, we need to add ng forms and also view child, because we need that in order to see this entire form. And then we have the onSubmit button, which works by taking the value, which is the Jedi, and also valid, which is if this form is valid or not. We don't need to use that really in this case, because you cannot push the button unless it's valid. But we can check for validity, and if it is valid, we add show time, died, and so on, image, things that doesn't really matter, and then we push this value and call reset in order to reset the form itself. Yeah, and it looks good. It pops up over there. Different ways of doing this, okay? Different ways of doing this, and there are actually even more ways of doing it with reactive forms and so on. So when you look at the documentation and how everything is done, well, just pick and choose the way you'd like to do it. Okay? I know how it works, usually works. You find some nifty way of doing it on Stack Overflow, and you get inspiration from that. And that's quite all right. I mean, this project that we are going to create, this web shop that you are going to create, isn't as much as previously when we were really hammering you that don't look at anyone's solution. You should know this by your own. Now it's so much that you're going to do that if you find inspiration from someone else, that's quite okay, because you need to incorporate that into your solution. And I mean, just taking a CSS file that someone else has created and try to make it your own, that's a headache or two. So get inspiration, look at Stack Overflow and so on, and there will not be a problem. because you need to incorporate it. I've been talking a lot of BS because I wanted to become 11 o'clock because we take a break now for 15 minutes. 15 minutes, people, and welcome back later on. We're on again. Let's move on swiftly to services. So what we've done so far is pretty much hard coding everything so that we have these arrays and so on. But if we'd like to show the list of Jedi in different pages, perhaps one for adding, one for deleting, one for modifying, or whatever it might be, we don't want to put it hard-coded into every page. And ideally, later on, we will also see to that we connect to a database of some kind. However, what we can do as the first step is to utilize services. And this provides, as I say, task-based functionality to components. So one task could be just getting these Jedi in one way or another. And the idea is, don't repeat yourself and make every service for one specific isolated task. So therefore, task-based. Later on, we will see that we will create one service for authentication, another for database access. We can use still more services for specific tasks. There are a number of built-in services. For example, Animate for creating cool animations. We won't look into that in this course. HTTP, which is a service that makes it possible for us to call REST APIs and stuff like that, making calls to other services, web services, and getting this information back. Router is something that we are going to look at, which is a way for us to go between different components. A service is a dependency class, and that means that it doesn't show anything in itself, but other components may be dependent on this class because it's still a class. So therefore we inject this class into other components. And that's why we have the annotation injectable rather than something like @service. We can use the CLI in order to create services, and we usually put them in a separate folder called services. We don't have to add service to the name because that's going to be added by the CLI. ng generate service, or if you're lazy, GS. Here we have what's happened lately is, the latest versions, is that we have this injectable. Previously we had to add this service to the module, but now we've done it the other way around. So each model has an injectable part over here where it says it is provided in root, so it's possible to reach in everything and not just in specific components. So far what we're going to do in this example is just to create a service that hard codes the values. Later on we're going to expand this to working with the database as well. But right now we hard code it, so we create a Jedi Master array as previously. We have a constructor where we create a number of these Jedi Masters, and we also have a getJedi method down here. As it is right now, the only service that this method provides is this getJedi. But when the application starts, it will also just create the array. Now we need to inject this service into the different components. In this case, we just have our Jedi component. So in the constructor for this component, we add private Jedi service : character service. And when we do that, we also need to add, of course, the import for this one. And in the ng init, we can add this Jedi should be this Jedi service getJedi. So we still have the Jedi array that we created before in our Jedi component, but instead of hard coding the values, we ask the service for these Jedi. And it looks exactly the same as before, because it works the same. However, we've been able to separate the different parts, which makes it a lot better in the long run. And if we want to add something to this list, we can do that using push as a method at Jedi in our service. So that means that in our component, instead of pushing it directly, what we do is that we send the value to the add Jedi in our service instead. Notice that so far everything is just kept in memory. We haven't persisted it anywhere, so when we restart the application, anything you've added will of course be removed. This works because we are working synchronously. Okay, so we send data, we receive data in sequence. In real world, as we spoke of previously, it's most often the case that we have some sort of external database or whatever, external service that we need to wait for. So we don't want to end up in our application not getting the data, nor do we want to end up in a situation where we have to wait a long time for the data. So instead, the best solution for this, and something that we are going to utilize a lot in Firebase, is to create observables. And we can create observables from our data sources right now. So we'll do that because we want to revisit them later on. So an observable basically is a live data source that we listen to, and instead of just getting the data when we say, we actually listen to it, or we subscribe to any changes that it will give us. And so, as it says, an open data stream that our application listens to. This is not really part of Angular itself, but rather RxJ, a reactive extension to JavaScript. However, it's something that comes with Angular. It's a library that they work with, so to say. We need to add observable and of from RxJ, I should say, so that we are able to subscribe to this data. We need to change the get Jedi from being something that returns a Jedi Master array to something that returns an observable of a Jedi Master. Okay, so it returns this Jedi, but we use this off in order to make it an observable of this kind. But in order to actually subscribe to the data, we need to say that we want to subscribe to it, and we need to add this in our component. So we say that we get Jedi as previously, but instead of just assigning that to the Jedi we've got, we say that subscribe to whatever's coming back, and say, and this is these anonymous lambda-like expressions, the J here is just a variable, the variable which represents whatever gets back, gets back from this get Jedi. Whatever that is, say that this Jedi should point to that. And the magic behind says then that we are actually subscribing to any changes that happen. And that also means that if we make a change, if we add a Jedi, this get Jedi will receive this and update automatically. Yeah, as I said, there are a number of built-in services. We'll get back to the observables later on, because we need to move on and talk a little bit about routing. And routing is, as I've said, the ability to navigate between different components. And that defines what to display where on a specific page, or rather on the page, because we're having a single page application. To implement this, we have to create a router module that handles all the pointers. And what this means is that we create a module, and this module has all the different URLs basically that we can move to. And we will point to different components for these URLs. And the reason why we want to use this is that this router functionality will also help us handle, for example, back button functionality, which is important, as we have. In reality, we just have one page. And that means that if we click somewhere and go somewhere without routing, back will take us to the previous page we were on. If we didn't, and I've said that you didn't have to, but if we didn't create a routing module when we created the project, we can create one later on by GM, for generate module. App routing, we call it. We make it flat, meaning that it will be in the root directory, and it will be a module for app. In this case, this means the entire one, added to the entire app module file. This will generate a general module, and that contains a bunch of stuff that we don't need, for example, common module and so on. But when we are done modifying it, it will look something like this. We will add router module and routes from Angular root, create an array of routes, which is empty for now, meaning that we don't have any specific components to go to. And then we export the router module and have a router module for route like this. Just copy paste, and not copy paste, but writing it down. In the rest of the code that we have, we add this router outlet where we want the different components to be shown. In our case, we will go to our app component, and in the HTML template for it, we will replace Jedi app that we've had previously with router outlet. And that means that the application, whenever we launch the application, the app component stuff with the logo and stuff like that, it will always be there. However, we can put different things beneath it. So we need to do some refactoring. We create a new component that we call the home component, and we make the root component or root path by, in the roots array, say that we have a path of nothing, which means the root or the index should go to the home component. And the Jedi component we get to by going to Jedi, and we also create one new component called add Jedi component, and the path for that one will be add Jedi. And that means that if we want to see all the Jedi, we now go to localhost 4200/Jedi. And it's up to us to decide exactly what we want to add here. So we don't have to put Jedi, we can call it Bahamalan. I have no idea what that is or how to type it down, but whatever we like. But preferably something that's easy to remember. And also remember that these will be URLs, so by the user they are bookmarkable. So they can bookmark Jedi, for example, and they will get to the application to that specific state of the application. You can't see it now, but it says /Jedi over there, and then you will see all the different Jedi. We don't have the add anymore because we have that at /add Jedi. Yeah, okay. So, just want to check yeah, I didn't miss anything. So, in order to seamlessly, without postback, navigate between these different parts, we need to add anchors, but the normal href will not work because that will make a postback. So instead, there's something called a router link. So it makes it possible for us to create links to Jedi and add Jedi like this, but without making a postback. And also, again, if we go to add Jedi, and we've done it like this with router links and all that stuff, we can just push the back button and we will get it back to the previous page. So if we push add Jedi, we will get to add Jedi like this. And we have a bookmarkable URL that we can use. And it's possible for us to get back by just pushing the back button. Here's something more about the links. If you have a toolbar, you might want to make them active and have another color depending on if this is the one you're at right now, what one, and so on. Just look it up. Because the next part that we probably want to use is these sending parameters. So it's possible for us not just to look at a single page itself, but also send a parameter like Kanan Jarrus, like this, and the %20 there symbolizes a space character. This means that we have, in this case, a new component that we will call details, to which we send a parameter, in this case, just one, Kanan Jarrus. And we use a service called activated root for this to work. Come on. So this is our details component. We add activated root, and in the constructor we create root, which is of this kind. And what we do here is that we want to get a snapshot of the parameters list and get name. And in this case, we just have one parameter. We can have in the parameter list, we could put many different things separated by the ampersand sign, and we can say that name equals to something and so on. But I've just made the simplest possible way of doing this. And we also make a call to get Jedi name with this name that we get over there and subscribe to the result. We haven't created this get Jedi name yet, but we will do. In the HTML, we just print out the information, the detailed information of the Jedi. This get Jedi name looks for a Jedi Master, and it checks if this entry name exists in the list Jedi, and if it does, it returns this entry so that we can see it, otherwise it sets it to null. And as we are going to add links for this, router links for this, we will always actually have something to look at. So a router link to details / name like this means that we will send the current name. It's easier to see over here. So we create a router link over here, and we set it to details, and we interpolate the name of this character, and then we print out the name. This is the name that we see. But if we put our mouse pointer over this one, it will say over here localhost blah 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 details / Cesartine. And if we press snook, the details will come up on details / snook like this. So it's a way to get the details from we are taking it from the name itself over here. Lastly, page not found. Sometimes things go wrong, and we don't want to end up on a ugly page. We want to handle all the kinds of errors. So it's possible to add a path to ***, create a new component not found, and in this one I just show an image, a GIF image, and say page not found. And if, for example, you make a /track, then you get to a 404 page not found, with Vader saying no. And that works for anything. So whenever it doesn't have a root, it will go to this page. Now, the topic for today was Firebase, and at last we're here. Fortunately, it's not that difficult when we know all of this other stuff. So even though we might not get to the end, I will give you a little preview and you got all this information. Firebase itself is a backend created by some people as part of something they called Evolve. They started a company later on called Firebase Inc. Google saw, well, this looks good, let's buy it, and they did. So it's now part of Google. It's an integrated service, and you might have heard of Google's cloud web services stuff is this other one that they have. So they actually have two different services available. Their large behemoth cloud service that's very much geared towards business, and this Firebase, which actually builds upon or uses Google's normal cloud services, but it's much more, let's say, developer oriented, and it's geared for developers. But as I said, they have different services. This is, I shouldn't say it's a simpler or because it contains most of the stuff that you would need actually, but it's a little bit easier to use and also a little bit cheaper. It has a large number of services and it grows. It has analytics because it's a Google service, so you need to see the engagement of the users and see how much it's used and so on, so you can analyze the usage. But the fun thing are all the developed things, I'd say. We have cloud messaging, mostly for apps sending notifications, but for everything. Firebase Auth for authorization. We will use it with a password username. The applications that I create for myself using Angular, I usually use Google login, but it's possible to log in using Facebook and Twitter, and lately also GitHub and Microsoft services. So it's just a layer making it possible for us to get the authorization ticket from any other service. Firestore, which we are going to use, is a NoSQL database. We have hosting for static web pages, meaning if we just have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we can host it on the Firebase server, so we can deploy it on Firebase. And Angular, when we build it, it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it makes it perfect for placing our stuff there. And then a few other things. They got cool things for machine learning, and they got cloud functions and stuff like that. Masses of things. And Google isn't giving us this without any hope of earning money, so you can pay for it, but the free tier is kind of okay, I'd say. So it says here the real time, but the Firestore, the database, can store up to 1 gigabyte and have 100 simultaneous connections. That's quite enough for your needs, I'd say. Hosting can be done up to 1 gigabyte, and remember that's 1 gigabyte of HTML, JavaScript and CSS, possibly images also. But if we need a lot of images, there's storage for 5 gigabytes of data for free. We can have phone authentication, but the normal authentication and cloud messages and so on are included. If that's not enough, there's a fixed price and a pay-as-you-go service as well. You need a Google account, but as your student accounts are Google accounts, this shouldn't be a problem. There are an upper limit of how many calls you can make to these services, and if you screw up your programming really bad, you can hit the roof, and some did last year, I know, but I mean it's loads of connections per day, so it shouldn't be a problem. If you find if you create some strange for loop that tries connecting again and again and again, it might happen, but yeah, it shouldn't. I've never run anywhere near the upper limit for this, but we'll see. On Firebase, and it's Firebase Google.com, there's loads of documentation, mainly geared for Java or Android development, iOS, JavaScript and C++. Angular uses TypeScript. TypeScript is a superset of Firebase. It's fairly easy to work with. We'll look at a specifically developed library for this as well. Log in with your Google account. You get to a console. When you open the console, create a new project, and you will be greeted with some more information. So you'll create a project name, and if you're lucky, you will get a nice project ID. You can try to change this into something else. Whatever you get on the project ID will be later on the default first part of your URL when you deploy it. So it might be a good idea to change this into something good. For example, 1dv508/group4 or something like that. That's also ugly, but it's a lot more possible that URL is available than my great web shop, for example. But I will not I call it whatever you like, unless it's something like my stupid teachers and so on.
So these are online tools?
These are online tools, yeah. Yeah.
A mobile version of a platform is necessary or not?
Sorry.
A mobile version.
No. You don't have to, not for smartphones, you don't have to. This works great with web applications that we are going to create. When you get there, you have the possibility to add authentication, and we're going to create users in order to do that. Email is a way that we are going to do it, but as I said, there's a bunch of more ways of doing it. Just go to authentication, sign-in method, and enable whichever one you like. In this case, I choose the email password, just push enable, and add something. When you enter the password, it will be in clear text, but when you've entered the password, you cannot see it again. And I know, because I did that. But you can, if this email over there is a real email, you can you can submit a new or one of these create new password thingies, and that will be automatic for you. But if you see phone, Google, and so on are other alternatives as well. I recommend using email password like this, but hey, it really doesn't matter what way you're doing it, as long as you find a way that you can add more users later on, and so on. Firestore is the database, and it's not a relational database like MySQL or Postgres or things like that. It's a document-based database, so it basically consists of a number of documents, and these can be seen as objects. And later on, we are creating each of our documents as one of these Jedi Masters. And that's because JSON is a preferred format. And we don't have a schema attached to it, meaning that we don't have a predefined way of what this looks like, this object. These documents are organized in collections, and a document cannot hold other documents but can point to other collections. And in this case, we're just making one collection with Jedi Masters, basically. In a real-world application, you can have users, you create a hierarchy of different things. Users well, I have one application where I create users, and then for each user I have a collection which in where the different users store how much time they put into different courses and so on. There is a short introduction on this YouTube link that you can watch, and I recommend that you do that in order to get a basic understanding. There are pros and cons with NoSQL databases or document databases like this, but they will be sufficient for what we are going to do now, and they can also handle really, really large amounts of data in a fast way. If we want to create a database, just go to the database option on the left hand, choose Cloud Firestore and put it in test mode. Test mode makes it possible for anyone to reach this database, not only authorized users. We will change this later on, but when we are developing, it's a lot easier to have it in test mode. As I said, we'll change this later on. We'll create a new collection called Jedi Masters, and after that, the first document will be one specific Jedi Master. Let the document ID be on auto ID for now, at least, or make it so, and then add like this. And as you see, this very much mimics how our specific Jedi Masters were created in our objects before. So name, home planet, time period, show time, and died like this. So the important information that we'd like to store. And you can add a few of these just, or whatever products in your case, so that we have some data. But later on, it will be a lot easier to add them using your web application. In order to communicate, we use something called the Angular Fire 2 library, which you can find on GitHub over here. It has a lot of documentation, and this will be our primary way of using Angular as a Firebase from Angular, and it's the best way of doing it. But check installation, because last time I did this, they had changed from previous, so just go there. Right now you npm install it like anything else, but the problem is that they changed what the package name was. And when you're done with that, you have the foundations, you have all the libraries that you need in order to connect to Firebase, but you still need to add to environments, variables, production, and production TS and production prod TS. These are available in a folder. Just open them, and in the Firebase console you will find something like this, and we need this part. It's an API key that shows that we have the right to use this, and all the other information that we need in order to connect to Firebase. So this is basically our authentication. I've deleted this, but I think I'll show you somewhere else. You cannot use this unless you're also logged in anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, so in your environments files you just add Firebase variable like this and all the information that you found on the previous page. Then you're up and running. We need to add some modules, and as we are going to use authentication and Firestore, we need to add those, but there is also a general Angular Fire module. Just add those and include them in the import sections. If you look at the documentation, it will say quite clearly exactly what you need to do. Now, instead of hard coding our data, we want to fetch it from the Firestore. And to do that, I actually think it's better to look at the code. What we do in our character service is that we have still a Jedi, which is an observable of type any. For some reason, I don't get it to work with Jedi Master, so choose any. Okay, in the constructor, we add the Angular Firestore service, AFS, we call it. That's what it says in documentation. You can call it anything, but AFS is usually what it's called. And we say that this Jedi, that one, should look at the collection Jedi Masters from AFS for any value changes over there. And when we do that, we have the connection. It will go to the database, it will fetch the data, and if we have this get Jedi, just as before, it will also display this. Yay! We're online, almost online. We're getting data from Firestore, at least. If we want to add data, well, it's not much more difficult than previous. Namely, instead of just pushing, we again use AFS, which is the service that we use in our service, the collection Jedi Masters, add J, and we add them. We'll look closely at making snapshots instead later on, because then we will also be able to retrieve the ID. But look, over here, we can snook, unknown, SQL, send it away, and if we look at the Jedi, we will see that snook is now available, and is also in the database. So fairly straightforward, I'd say. If we want to get details, as we did previously when we clicked, we need to add a way to get the ID. And to do that, I would recommend that you also, in your class, add a field ID $string, because what we are going to do is this. Oh my God, you say, what's that? I don't know. Basically, what this does, that we put in our service, is not only to get the data as we did previously, but get all the data, even the ID that we have set as auto. So the auto ID will also be fetched when we do this. It looks a bit clunky, and we don't need to know exactly what's happening. Just use it, because you'll see it numerous times in the documentation. We call the collection on Jedi Masters. We look for snapshot changes, so we look for the changes just as previously, but we add a pipe. Pipe means that we want to make changes to this. what kind of changes do we want to do? Well, we want to map. And map in this case means that we want to put a new look or a transformation on the information. It's the same map as in JavaFX. So we say that whatever comes in, we call that J for Jedi Master. You can call it P for product or whatever. For every J, Jedi Master, create the map on this one where A, which is just the data, consists of the data payload over here as a Jedi Master, just as previously, and also extract the ID from the database and put everything together and return that. So it catches all the data, even the stuff that we've not created ourselves, put it in a nice little object and send it back to us. Yeah, it's just what I said. So, in order for this to work, we then just change in our code for the details that we want to get a document, a specific document from Jedi Masters with this ID. And notice these backticks as another way of entering data. So it's just, the backticks are just for creating this kind of string concatenation. And then listen to the changes and return this one Jedi. And that's basically it. So instead of going for an ID with the name, we say that we go for a specific document with a specific ID. Like this, Shakti. And we need to change, of course, in the HTML, so that happens as well. To use authentication on our database, go into rules for the database and change allow read-write to allow read-write request auth ID null. And we got no time left, so I just run through this. Authentication, create a new login component, add it to router, create a form for entering, implement an onSubmit, and create a service for the login and get auth. It's fairly straightforward. Create a component which just calls the onSubmit. This is our service for authentication, which in itself, it's a login component, uses auth service and router because we want to route to the correct place. The service in itself checks the login, sends in an email and a password. It has something called a promise, which basically works with these async stuff so that we get this, it promises an answer to us. And with just this sign in with email and password call in the auth service on Firebase, we just send the email and the password to Firebase. Firebase checks, is this an authorized user, sends a token back to us if it is. And it works basically the same for all other ways of authenticating a user. And logging out is just calling sign out. Yeah, you can check this. Cool stuff. Log out if we have a user. This is ugly as sin, but you make nicer things later on. And then we can log in if we're not logged in. And we can guard pages using can activate. We create a new service for this, and we just say that Jedi add and details can only be reached if we are authenticated. And then we deploy, do a Firebase login, just sign off your soul to Google, and do a ng build. In this case, it went from about 400 megabytes to 15 megabytes. That includes images that I didn't remove. And then just say Firebase deploy. And in this case, it's on Star Wars Firebase.firebaseapp.com. and it looks like this. Choo-hoo! If you know the password, you can log in, but you don't. And I don't remember either. But I have it written down somewhere. But it's available, deployed somewhere on the cloud. And that's something that you will also be able to do quite easily. Of course, there's a lot more you can learn. Here are some nice resources that you can look at. Take this long weekend that you have now and go through all of them. From that one to that one. No. But it's a nice way of getting into how all of this works. And when you get to know it, hopefully you will find it just as fun to work with as I do. Okay. I don't know how to end this. Just bye-bye. Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Your password is not Pink Floyd.
No, it's not. It's something with ABC, I know.
Obvious, I think.
Yeah, yeah.